Hello, and welcome to my full build guide for Smith of Kitava in the 0.2 patch. In this video, I'll be sharing you everything I've learned over 200 hours of grinding and playtesting to get to level 98. This build is for you if you want to be insanely tanky and do a lot of damage, while at the same time being easy to play and great at clearing almost all content. Without further ado, I think I'll get started with showing my character stats. This build is very tanky. I do have 4,300 health with 49% armor here and 75% block. The key stats you want to look for here also is 90% for all elemental resistance, as well as a very high total life regeneration per second. All these combined offers a really good amount of defensive layering where even if I am taking hits, I'm quickly recovering most of the damage that is taken, and all of that elemental damage is reduced by 90%, which I think is very common if you are playing Smith of Kitava. You can see up here that I have a reasonable amount of strength as well as just enough dexterity and intelligence to get the support gems I need. So in this build, I'm using Leap Slam exclusively to both get around the map as well as to clear almost all the enemies. I'm taking the support gems Momentum in order to do basically 40% more damage, Martial Tempo just to move around a little bit faster, Reach and Magnified Effect, which is both increasing the AoE, as well as Close Combat just to do a little bit more damage to the enemies that are closer to me. This one is pretty optional, as you can change this one with any of the other increased damage support gems such as Fire Infusion or Primal Ornament. I'm just opting to keep those on Hammer of the God for bossing damage, but any damage increase is also fine. An alternative to Close Combat is also using Consecrated Ground. That's going to provide you a lot of healing when you land. You can see over here for the impact radius, you want to keep this above 4 meters in order to have a decent enough clear when jumping into packs of enemies. For Hammer of the Gods, I'm using Concentrated Effect for more damage. Since we're only using this on bosses, we don't really need the AoE. And then I'm taking Searing Flame as well as Eternal Flame. Both of these are going to massively increase the ignite damage. So this one's increasing the magnitude of the ignite, and this one is pretty much doubling the duration. And then I'm taking Primal Ornament to increase that fire damage, as well as Fire Infusion for just more fire damage. You can actually see that the hit itself isn't too big. You can see that's about maybe 100,000, but most of the damage is actually coming from the ignite, which on average here is going to be about 75,000 damage per second that lasts 10 additional seconds. So almost 750,000 damage is coming from the ignite versus the 75 from the initial hit. And in order to prime Hammer of the Gods and to get the glory for it, especially on bosses, is I use both Ruthless for stun buildup as well as Overpower for also more stun buildup, and then 3 of the Aftershock support gems. You can see here 25% increased chance for Aftershocks, and then Tremors also provides additional Aftershock chance. With the Reverberate support gem, which I believe is new, this also increases all of those Aftershock chances even further. So you can see here on the right that there is a really high chance for there to be several Aftershocks, and I can just test that right here. You can see that there's 2, 3, 4, 5 Aftershocks, even 6, 7. So you can see that it can kind of just continue to go if you're lucky. So when you're hitting a boss, you can stack multiple up at the same time, and this will quickly build up the boss's stun bar and prime your Hammer of the Gods. I also use Shockwave Totem for bossing, so throwing this out, it will continuously hit the boss. This allows you to keep your stun uptime if you are not able to stay within the range. So the support gems here I'm using are the Totem Speed with Ancestral Urgency, Ironwood just to make them a little tankier, but the 2 key ones here are actually Fire Exposure to apply fire exposure on the boss when you inflict ignite, as well as Ignition. Because the shockwave totem damage is relatively low, ignition is pretty important to more reliably ignite the boss. I think the calculated ignite chance is maybe about 30% per shockwave, and usually you just want to get the fire exposure onto the boss before you're dropping Hammer of the Gods, which it usually will. For the next skill gems, I am using Herald of Ash here. This does a ton of damage because I'm completely speccing into fire damage, which I'll show on the passive tree in a bit. But I do take Persistence, which increases the ignite duration, Deadly Herald, which increases the damage by 30%, as well as just Fire Mastery and Strong-Hearted since I have additional Spirit. Over here, I take Overwhelming Presence. This just reduces the elemental ailment resistance that the enemies have, as well as making them easier to stun. So altogether, a great a great spirit gem to use. Here I'm using Vitality, Cannibalism, and Herbalism. These are all just tanky related support gems, which helps increases the survivability of the build pretty significantly. For additional mobility, I'm using Shield Charge. The support gems on this one doesn't really matter. And finally, I'm using 2 War Cries. These are used in tandem with Hammer of the Gods. After you get the stun, I use both Infernal Cry and Seismic Cry. So Infernal Cry is just going to add a lot of extra fire damage to the next attack. You can see that this one increases it by 35% per 5 power of enemy in range, up to 150%. In this case, it's going to have 20 power from a boss, so it's going to be adding 140% additional damage there. So the support gems I use on this one is Premediation, so this one just adds 15% more damage for Hammer of the Gods. Tireless, which you can sometimes just get an extra empowered ability. This is great just for clearing. Ingenuity to decrease the cooldown, as well as Radiant Cry. This is going to give you 16 rage on the boss, so it just adds a little bit of extra damage before you rip Hammer of the Gods. Seismic Cry is also pretty core. When the boss is heavy stunned, this will guarantee an aftershock, so it basically gives you 2 hits of Hammer of the Gods, so this is also very important. With that, I'll move on to explaining the passive tree. So starting with the Ascendancy, I think these are pretty straightforward. You take Coal Stoker and Forged in Flame to get your fire resistance to match your other elementals, and then both of these will increase your cold and lightning resistance, and then this one's just going to increase your maximum cold and lightning resistance. So when you first start on this build, you'll definitely want to take all of these nodes here to give you the base fire resistance, lightning resistance, cold resistance. And once you start getting enough fire resistance to replace these, then you can start taking the maximum life and strength, as well as the life regeneration. While you're still working on the build, you're probably going to find it hard to get that 5 maximum fire resistance, so I think Flowing Metal here is really great. But when you hit really endgame in terms of gearing, you're able to move that actually into Molten Symbol. This is going to allow you to block basically 25%, about 20% of physical damage. So this is just going to be a lot of effective health. So moving on to the tree, I'll kind of just be going over my reasoning behind each of the nodes I'm taking. So I think some of the no-brainer ones up front are Burn Away and Burning Strikes. This is just going to add fire damage. Over here, I am taking both Brutal, Sturdy Metal, and Relentless. After some testing, I found Armor to actually be relatively effective for reducing physical damage, and I think Relentless provides a lot of core stats, including life regeneration and strength, and Sturdy Metal is very okay. I wouldn't say this is honestly all too great, but Brutal is also pretty decent for one node. So the 3 travel nodes here aren't too bad, and it kind of justifies getting Relentless. I'm taking Unstoppable Barrier here for some block chance, and this is in combination of basically anointing Lay Siege and taking this tree up here for offensive stance for a ton of damage based off of your block. So essentially with this build, you want to hit 75% block, and with both offensive stance and Lay Siege, you're able to add another 150% additional increased damage here. So you may notice that I do take Wide Barrier here. This is going to give you 30% block chance at the cost of reducing your armor by 25%, but at the end of the day, that is pretty worth it, as you can kind of overcome the loss in armor, and you save so many block chance points, and you don't need to get block chance on all of your jewels if you take this. So it's pretty important that you get enough block chance on your shield itself so that you can avoid taking so many block chance points on the tree, which I'll go over a little bit more when gearing. So moving on, I will be basically going over the two weapon sets I have. The red one will be for general map clearing, and this is the one you should probably be focusing on for the most part, are the weapon set 1, which is in red. You will notice I have weapon set green. This is specifically for basically doing pinnacle bosses. I don't really do any of the weapon set changes until I need to do pinnacle content. Even regular map bosses, I don't really bother with this. So this is just some additional optimization you can think about if you're doing basically pinnacle bossing. So moving forward, I take beef for additional strength, so this just gives you life and a ton of strength for 2 points. And unbending I think is a no-brainer for that additional maximum health, as well as resolute technique for basically not needing to build any accuracy. Then I do take impact area, so you'll notice that I take a lot of AoE nodes in order to increase the AoE of Leap Slam for better clearing. Then moving over here, you can see that this build is revolving around Avatar of Fire, so I exclusively only do fire damage. So everything scales off of fire in this build, including just getting Magnitude of Ignite, fire penetration, etc. I do opt here for lasting trauma. This significantly increases the ignite damage by about maybe like 30%. I don't think this is something that should be skipped. I see a lot of people skipping it, but if you are speccing into Avatar of Fire, it's totally worth it. I take the fire nodes here. These are all pretty decent. And then I also take Primal Growth. So this is just increasing a lot of AoE. So I think you may have noticed it was 4.7, but after killing an enemy, it increases to over 5 meters for Leap Slam. Immolation here is also great. You get some strength, and the Magnitude of Ignite's pretty good. Unfortunately, the Ignite chance nodes leading up to it is a little lackluster, and I've already explained taking offensive stance up here. Going down on the tree, I think brute strength is pretty much a no-brainer. You just get a lot of damage for the strength you build, as well as taking blood magic up here, which I did miss, will negate basically the reduction in mana cost. So with casting all of your attacks using basically life, it's really important that you have enough health regeneration per second, which I'll go over on how to achieve that in a second, but one of that is taking leather bindings, which will help mitigate a lot of the self-inflicted damage from blood magic. Going down here, Giant's Blood is a no-brainer, so you can have a two-handed mace as well as a shield, and taking Unnatural Resilience is also a no-brainer for any Smith of Kitava players, as you'll basically get additional maximum fire resistance for just stacking fire resistance. So on the tree here, or on my character sheet here, you can see I do have 272 fire resistance, which is adding a ton of maximum fire resistance, which is going to be, with some really quick math, 180, right? 180 divided by 40. So I'm basically getting 4 maximum fire resistance. I don't actually think it's 1, but basically it's 4 maximum fire resistance from this one. which is really good for a node, as well as you get one more here. So these three will give you 5 maximum fire resistance. Moving down the tree, I am taking incendiary as well as smoke inhalation. You want to get your fire resistance penetration high enough so that you can ignore all of the monster resistances, especially on maps that have that. Because all of the damage is fire, it's very easy just to stack it in one direction since you don't have to deal with physical damage. I'm also taking these AoE nodes here to increase AoE damage, as well as just the size of all of those AoEs. These are pretty good in terms of just overall clear. And then lastly, you can see me speccing up for Adrenaline Rush. This will give you increased movement speed, as well as a little bit of attack speed if you've killed an enemy, and this is just really nice to have quality of life to just get around the map faster. You may notice that I do actually have Acceleration Anointed. These are coming from my Megalomaniac, which I have here, which actually has Lay Siege and Exposed to the Inferno, and I am anointing Acceleration. This is definitely a nice to have. A lot of people anoint Titanic, for example, to skip these 3 nodes, which are a little bit lackluster, but I like having the 3 additional movement speed, and the skill speed is not too bad. For Exposed to the Inferno, this is completely optional as part of my Megalomaniac. You can definitely just anoint Lay Siege in of itself, skip the Megalomaniac, and not take Acceleration, and that will definitely be a budget way of achieving pretty similar damage without having the movement speed here. This is also very optional. The fire resistance penetration can be achieved through other jewels. For the jewels themselves, I am basically running maximum fire resistance on some of them. Fire damage, life regeneration rate, and magnitude of ignites are very good nodes to have. So on this one you can see it's pretty similar. I do have some stun buildup as well as stun threshold, and this one I have some fire penetration as well as damage with maces and ignite chance, and this one also has that fire resistance, maximum fire resistance node. So in terms of the bossing part, you're basically wanting to max all of the fire damage that you're doing and removing all of the AoE. So that's kind of the goal there. You can see it's pretty focused around just doing more damage instead of any of the AoE nodes. So I don't think it's anything too special to call out. It's pretty much just this section here as well as this section here for bossing. Alright, so now I'd like to go over the items for the build. So I think the build revolves around the mace. I think most builds do in terms of just getting damage. The key lines you want here are plus levels to all melee skills. Each level here is going to add almost 7% more damage. So in theory, you could get a really high physical damage weapon here, but it's just going to be hard to get the same level of damage if you had plus 7 to all melee skills. So other lines is just as much physical damage as possible, and fire damage here actually isn't too bad since that adds to basically all the fire damage I'm doing already. For the helmets, I'm using Thrill Steel. This is purely for Onslaught. Another helmet that you could try is the Deepest Tower, and that requires some changing up on the passive tree in order to get all of those low life nodes as well as increasing presence, but that should give you a lot more damage. But in terms of speed and clear, Thrill Steel is really good at just getting you around the map because Onslaught will be giving you 10% more movement speed as well as 20% increased skill speed. For your shield, you kind of want strength, life, as well as physical damage reduction and any resistance that you need to fill out. So whether that's chaos res or more fire resistance, both of those are perfectly fine. A key line that you do want here though is increased block chance. The higher the better, because it makes it a lot less passive tree intensive in order to hit that 75% block chance. So it's very important that you have a high block chance roll here. For your amulet, you want plus levels to all melee skills as well as much life as you can get on this. Fire resistance is also good, and spirit is also not bad at all. but definitely not necessary if you're on a budget. For the chest piece, you want to get the ornate plate with as close to 2.5% maximum life regeneration per second. This is really important for getting as much health regeneration as possible. You also want to see ones that either have 3 sockets or physical damage reduction on it. Chaos resistance is also not too bad, as those can kind of roll up to 20 some, which is kind of better than what a soul core would give you. For your rings, you can get chaos resistance or fire resistance on these. That doesn't really matter. The core stats you want these to have are life and strength, as well as any fire damage that you can get here. So you can see both of these are pretty much identical in terms of just the idea of the stats they want. For your gloves, you want plus levels to all melee skills here, and basically as much life, damage, and resistance as you can get. For the belt, I used the Inferno class. This basically gets you a lot of maximum fire resistance really easily. So I have an overruled one here, as well as one with high fire resistance. This one's just makes it easier to gear everything else. You can replace this with other belts, but this one just gives you almost all the stats you really want. So you can definitely replace this later if you're able to get those stats on other pieces. For the boots, it's pretty straightforward as well. Similar to like the rings, you want to hit your resistances as well as getting life and movement speed. So not too much to say there. And then I think the last one I want to call out here is Olros Resolve's Ultimate Life Flask. This flask is really important for keeping up your overall health in terms of just taking burst damage, as well as actually massively increasing your effective HP, as you're able to proc Olros Flask before even taking any damage, just based off of using blood magic. So if I were to use a leap slam here, I can press Olros Flask at the exact same time as my health is decreasing from blood magic, and you can see here that I've applied the guard to my health. So this can give you a lot of health when you dive into a pack of enemies that you know will be bursting you as you are landing, and this is basically giving you 30% more HP. For the Atlas tree, I think this one is still a work in progress. For the pinnacle stuff, I think this is pretty good for this build in terms of just maximizing the return rates of all of the map mechanics. So you can take a look at this if this interests you. I am currently experimenting with strong boxes to see after the loot buff of whether or not these are effective. I think they're pretty decent so far, but I'm also still heavily spec'd into pack size and getting those precursor influences up, so those juice regions are more effective. I am doing shrines on the boss tree here, but can also swap it for strong boxes for fun. And the one content I haven't really gotten too far into is doing Arbiter. I think the bossing damage requiring basically stunning the boss is pretty difficult, especially as you increase the Arbiter chances, or sorry, the Arbiter levels. So in this case, I did the first level of Arbiter in order to get the boss points, but I haven't decided to go on further just due to it just being a hard boss, and I don't think I really want to farm that content. So with that, I think I've gone over most of the build. In this section, I'll be pretty much just running you guys through a map and giving you some commentary of what it's like to map. So I've already picked out this map here, which is pretty generic. It just has a bunch of the content on it. So you can basically check out everything here except for Delirium. I don't think Delirium really is difficult at all for this build, so it pretty much just makes them a little bit tankier, which I think you'll quickly see here. As long as you don't have like an increased life on the Waystone, it keeps it really easy. Alright, so as you can see, I've spent a lot of points getting AoE, and it makes it really nice when just leaping around the map. You can kind of just jump once into these packs of enemies and it clears almost all of them. I'm gonna follow this wisp to see if I can get anything out of this. Looks like this rare will get chosen. Or hammer the gods just to one-shot it, but you can just as easily leap slam that one. So ritual itself is pretty easy. You kind of just leap around. I like to throw the totem in the middle of the pack of enemies. And I like to keep myself topped off with my oil Roth flask in the middle of it. That way any burst damage can be kind of like negated by the over shield. Which I guess in this case it's actually called guard, but basically it's invisible health that you can see in your top right or top left there. So yeah, as I mentioned before, the nice thing with the Oroth flask is you can use your blood magic in order to press it even while you're quote-unquote at full health, because you lose a little bit of health when you are using your skills due to the delay in health regeneration. You can actually pop your Oroth flask and get that guard stacked up when you're pretty much at full health. So that's pretty much adding another 1500 onto my HP total, which brings me close to 6000. With all the resistances and regeneration that I have, it's really hard to get bursted down. So some of these rares take a couple more hits than normal. Otherwise, a lot of rares will even die to one leap slam, and the magnitude of ignite will actually be high enough to kill the enemy as you run away from them. The only downside is by doing that you have to go back and pick up their items if they actually drop anything, which used to be fine before the loot buff, but now since they're more likely to drop something, it's sometimes just a little faster to kill them. So one of the annoying things with this build is these volatile plants. They do chaos damage, so they're going to be hurting a lot more than any elemental damage, and taking a whole bunch of them when they stack up on each other can definitely one-shot you if you're not careful. These are pretty easy as well. You drop hand the gods and then you can throw your bow on top of it, and you should have enough time to click through all of the, I guess, click attempts to get the essence to drop in the time it takes for the hammer of the gods to come down. So most expedition stuff is pretty easy. I would advise not stacking, penetrating a certain element and then picking that those elements do additional damage. Otherwise, most of it's pretty straightforward. With this build, obviously, you can't take the one where you don't do any fire damage, so that is something you need to skip. But everything else is pretty much a freebie. So by using the war cry, you're actually able to kill most rares really easily, just by slamming into them once. So here I'll show a breach. These are also really easy. You kind of just hop around the edge of the breach most of the time. If you notice there being a lot less drops, it's because I'm hiding the one breach splinters, since they're just not really worth picking up for me. I honestly kind of hate running around clicking them, so just kind of removing them keeps them out of sight, out of mind. So you can definitely loot after. I'm a little bit lazy, so I kind of just pick up the loot along the way. That way I don't have to loop back and pick up everything. Let's see here. So usually just slam the researcher ones. Hopefully you get quantity and rarity. Let's see if this one drops anything good. Alright, not too bad. Definitely take that. I'm stuck. So most rares, you can kind of just hop on them a couple times. You can definitely just leave them alone. Sometimes they'll die, like I mentioned. So I think this one you can see, if I did use my war cry there, it would have totally died. So while you're running up to them, I think I can show an example here. Maybe this one. I'll use my war cry, jump on this enemy, and then I can just leap away. You can see it actually died really quickly there. The war cry definitely adds a ton of damage. I'll use the war cry here, and then you can see if I walk away, it'll kind of just burn out in the background. This one had proximal, so unfortunately I had to be close to it. So you can definitely see also the loot buff in play here. I do have 234 map rarity here, and stuff definitely is dropping. So the loot buff is definitely nice. I wish I could take more advantage of this. I'll be unfortunately having to take a break for the next 10 days as I'll be out of the country to on a business trip, so I won't be able to play on this build for a little while. But the Chaos Shrine is actually one of my favorites here. It's really nice at just proccing the Herald of Ash explosion onto all of the enemies and kind of just doing like almost like a recursive herald that we were getting in the last patch. Let's see if we got anything here. Usually I skip things like exalts. They're not really worth that much. Take space here. Continue to defer that. Nice. Bad greater annulment. Oh, this is the bad one. That's unfortunate. So it'll definitely be... I guess I can keep this in there. It's definitely a shame since it's just basically 2 annuls, which aren't worth a lot, but I'm gonna grab that one just for as a souvenir. And then I think the last thing we really have, besides maybe, I guess I'm missing like one rare or so, but I'll show you a boss example here of how to boss. So I throw the totem down, kind of try to stack as many of these rolling slams on top of each other, and then drop Hand of the Gods. This boss is pretty annoying. Sometimes it teleports right after the Hand of the Gods lands, but I'm just gonna let the ignite damage do the work. As you can see, that kind of kills most bosses really quickly, and you don't really have to worry about any general map boss. Maybe besides some of the really large ones that are harder to stun. This build can still stun them, but it just definitely takes a while. And that's why this build is not as good for pinnacle bossing. So with that map clear, I hope this video has been helpful for you. Please leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, I'll always be in the comments to answer any of those. And yeah, hope to see you there.